Roseland, which is all the way out south by Pullman. Pullman basically 103rd Street to 115th. And Roseland was west of the tracks at Cottage Grove. And Pullman came into being, well, the area was settled by the Dutch. Then Pullman bought up a lot of land, and he had like 7 men go out and buy up the properties without telling anyone what was going on. And then he said, okay, I'm building my model town, company town, and my factory down here to make Pullman Palace car companies. Excuse me. And that's when all the skilled laborers came over from Europe to work on his cars. So a lot of the people that lived in his houses and his community of Pullman were all skilled labor from Europe, and a lot of them were Italians, and they settled in Pullman and then just outside of Pullman. So Roseland started out Dutch, and then as the company built up and brought over employees, there were a lot of Italians that moved over there. So that's how Roseland Pullman became very Italian. And Dominic mentioned that Mario Avignoni was writing this column. Mario wrote this column for 40 years, Petals from Roseland, and I took it up about 3.5 years ago. And one of the things Mario wrote about was when everybody came back from the war. That's when he started the column. Everybody came back from the war, and when Father Purini started the Fra Noi, he asked him to get the South Side Italians from Roseland involved. So that's when Mario started the column, and it dealt with a lot of people that had been in the war, and they all knew each other, they all lived in the neighborhood, they worked at pretty much the same places in the community. So he had a wealth of mouth-to-mouth knowledge of what was the history, because they all were living it at the time. For me, I am backtracking, because we all know Roseland is a neighborhood change, it's in the news for bad things now. But Pullman is diversified. Pullman is pretty strange because it's 115th Street, basically to 111th Street, and from Cottage Grove east, and that's the town of Pullman. And within that town, there's a lot of people who have not moved out. I work on a Facebook site called Roseland Roundtable, and someone just wrote on there and made me so mad. I just saw it yesterday. Said, oh, don't go there. My husband used to be a cop down there, and people are shot. 3 people get shot a day down in Pullman. It's like, if that was the case, there'd be nobody left alive in Pullman, okay? So I told her, I said, you know, the thing is, I just left Pullman. I just took training as a docent or a tour guide at the Pullman factory site. And so there's a lot of people still in Pullman. So I began with those people down there getting information. And having grown up there, I talked about like cruising the Ave and things that were familiar to us in the 60s. And in turn, after writing a number of columns, 2 friends of mine, Dan Bavino and Paul Petratus, and we got together. We said, well, we all had a common interest in Roseland. And so we got together for breakfast at Kell Harbor Inn, which is the only restaurant in Pullman. And we went there Saturday morning for about a month and a half. And after a while we decided, well, you know, we got to do something. How can we get something going here? And we came up with a Facebook site. And that's how we started. So let's see how we do this. Oh, very good. So where do you go for information was our big thing, because we're like, oh, we don't have any information. There was a book, 2 books, a 2-volume set of picture book of Roseland that was put out in the 80s. And we had seen copies of it, but there were none available for purchase. And it turns out that the 5 people that put it together, a couple of them had passed away. Mario was one of them. The guy, Paul Petratus of our threesome, was another one. But then 2 of the people, one person had the plates for it, and they said, well, my dad was the printer, and I had the plates, and, well, I'm not giving them up. And then another one, his son said, well, yeah, well, we have the copyright to it. So it's like, well, where do we go for information then? Because we couldn't use what they had. Well, here's where you go, hand-me-downs. You go to your mom and pop, you go to your grandparents, you go to your great-grandparents if they're still alive. And if your great-grandparents are alive and your mom aren't alive and your mom and pop are, you ask them, you know. And they'll tell you, you know, stories. One of the things, my dad lived until he was 87, but I never got the chance to talk to him. My one sister went to Italy with him, because I come from a large family of 8. Originally my mom got it up to 12, but 8 is where we settled. But anyway, 4 guys and 4 girls, you know. So my dad, my sister and my dad went to Italy and took a trip. And my sister tells me last year, oh, we had such a good time. Dad's telling me all these stories and everything. I says, So you wrote them down, right? She says, well, no. I said, okay, we got no stories, you know. But I'm the youngest in my family. My oldest brother's 81. You know, just in talking to them, I'd taken my brother for a ride through Roseland, and he says, yeah, when we lived there. I'm like, what are you talking about when we lived there? Oh, it was before you were born. I had no idea. You know, so, oh yeah, and the guy next door did this and that, you know. So that's how you find out more facts about what's going on. By asking people, asking your relatives, you know. Okay. Oh, look. So, beyond going home, what else? What that means is, who else can you ask? You know, like I said, I talk to my brothers and sisters, and the funny thing is, we still get along. You know, we have our quarrels and things, but we get along. We were just recently all at dinner, and these people are like, "Oh, so you're all friends?" And we're like, "No, we're brothers and sisters." They just couldn't believe that we could all sit down and talk. You know, so you go and, you know, like I said, your brothers and sisters, and all you got to do is, with my family, I don't know, you get together and you bring something up, and all of a sudden, they're, oh yeah, remember this, remember that, you know. If you talk to my sister Tootsie, Augusta, we all have good Italian names. Instead of CJ, I'm Costante, you know. So I talked to my sister Augusta, Tootsie, and you mentioned a cat. She says, oh yeah, I remember when I was 12 and I caught this cat and I thought he looked so pretty with a bow around his neck, except he choked to death. You know, it's like, where am I going to hear a story like that, you know? And then it's like when they were in school, you know, the trouble they got into, and oh, remember this. And this is valuable family history because, you know, it's going to be gone if it's not related. And if you want further family history, and like I said, if you talk to your parents or your grandparents, you know, and we're first generation here, so my parents would have been a wealth of information that genealogy was the big thing at the time. Because there's so many stories. And I just met Wednesday night with Ann Renzani, who's going to be 94, June 6th. And Ann is in great shape mentally. You know, she can't get around like she used to and all this, but she loves having visitors. So I went out and visited her, and she said, oh, your mom was the greatest lady. She was so nice. She says, I used to work at Carnolo's. And I'm like, Carnolo's? What would I know? Carnolo's was a clothing store next to Raymond Levine's, which is in Roseland. But anyway, she says, oh, your mom would come in there, you know, with 3 or 4 of you running around her. And I'm like, oh, that was me. You know, 3 or 4 little ones running around her, you know. And then she's like, oh, yeah, she came in, she was so nice. And Mrs. Cornello loved her so much. She says, oh, you know, your mother said, oh, I'd like to get this house dressed, but I don't have enough money. She said, don't worry about it, pay for it on time. She said, no, I can't do that, you know. But she said, before you leave, Mrs. Martello, have a cup of coffee, you know. So my mother said, no, I got these kids running around. She said, oh, don't worry, you know. So Aunt says she sat down, had a cup of coffee, and before she left, Mrs. Cornello gave her the house dress as a gift, you know. But it was really nice to hear because it's so heartwarming because, you know, I was a little brat apparently when I was a little kid, you know, running around like normal kids. So it was real surprising to hear that, someone talking about my mom, you know, when I was just a little kid, when it's like, yeah, that's mom, you know. So that's what I mean beyond going home. All these resources you have around you. And it's like if you're working on a book, you know, you can ask your cousins, you know, hey, look. Apparently I set this slide up on Faye. Pretty cool, huh? Aunts and uncles. They got stories. You know, because maybe you weren't around, but they were growing up with